Thank you. Thank you so much. And welcome, everybody, to Met by Moonlight, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Whether you're joining us here in the room or watching us later on the recording, welcome. And thank you so much for joining us. We've got a great conversation ahead of us with this wonderful panel here. It's the fifth in the series. We've already done. What did we do? We did Richard III. You were there for that one, Hugh. We did Romeo and Juliet. We did the Scottish play. We did Hamlet. And now Midsummer Night's Dream. And then later on in January, we're going to do Julius Caesar as well to wrap up the series. And it's all part of the celebration of the 400th anniversary of the publication of the first folio. And in fact, that's like now. It was literally yesterday, wasn't it? Or today, is that right? Yeah, the actual 400th anniversary of the publication. So it's a real thrill to be here, for us Shakespeare nerds, I guess, and for you, you're all Shakespeare nerds as well. That's why you're here, to be here on the actual anniversary or thereabouts. Make sure, if you haven't already, you check out that exhibition upstairs. It's really great. They've got not just the first folio at the library, they've got the second, third, and fourth folios as well. There are some great stories behind them and how the library acquired them. And they've also got some of the great sources of Shakespeare's material. They've got a Plutarch up there. They've got a Holinshed. They've got a Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen. They've got all sorts of amazing stuff up there. So go check it out. The first folio, as you know, was compiled by Shakespeare's friends 7 years after he died. And we thank them for that, because if it hadn't been, obviously almost half of Shakespeare's plays might have been lost to us forever, including Julius Caesar, As You Like It, The Tempest, and so on. So here we are to talk about A Midsummer Night's Dream, and let's meet our panel for this evening. Now, panelists, as I said last month to our panel, there's nothing worse than being on a panel and someone's reading out your whole CV about every single show that you've been in and been a part of. So I'm not going to do that. All that stuff's on the website. I'll take it as read, but I will just briefly introduce who they are and their connection to Midsummer Night's Dream. Here is actor and writer Imogen Sage, who is playing Titania in Bell Shakespeare's production of A Midsummer Night's Dream next year, and did a couple of years ago as well, and we're going to talk about that. I've got next to me here actor, singer, writer, cabaret artist extraordinaire Virginia Gay, who played Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Remember, with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra and Belvoir, and they did it with Simone Young, and she's also played Titania and Helena. And over here we have Associate Professor Hugh Griffiths from the University of Sydney. Hugh, thank you so much for joining us as well. Now, the title of this panel, Met by Moonlight, and it's missing one word from the line. What's the full line? Ill met by moonlight. Who says that in the play? Yes, who said Oberon? Thank you. Yes, gold star, sir, very good. So, ill met by moonlight, proud Titania. So already in that scene, Shakespeare sets up the use of language to set the scene. He's doing the show during the day. It's 2:00 in the afternoon. Bright sun. Well, I don't know. It's London, so not sure about that. But it is certainly during the daytime. The audience and actors are in the same lighting state. It's not like now where the actors are more lit than the audience. And so Shakespeare sets the mood and the setting with that simple line, ill met by moonlight. And the audience goes, okay, we're at night and the moon is out, and they just go along with it. Shakespeare trusted the imagination of his audience. Hugh, perhaps you can start by telling us a little bit about the background to this play. Shakespeare obviously didn't come up with it out of thin air. There were a number of sources that he tapped into to produce Midsummer Night's Dream.
That's right. So one of his main sources for Midsummer Night's Dream is his favourite poem, which is Ovid's Metamorphoses. He loved that poem. He would have read it at school. He would have read it in Latin, read it more recently in English translation as well, Golding's version. And it rattles all the way through his work, just as it does through English Renaissance culture. So everybody's obsessed with this poem. And how it lands in this play is pretty obvious in a way from the title Metamorphoses. It's all about change. It's an epic poem which tells stories of kind of mad transformations, usually transformed by love and desire, mixing animals and humans and gods, men and women, all sorts of kind of categories melding and mixing. And that obviously has a big impact on Shakespeare's imagination. It kind of runs all the way through his plays, this poem. But in Midsummer Night's Dream, it seems like he kind of realizes it in dramatic form, where people actually do change in front of your eyes, from one thing to another, where they change who they love into, loving somebody else, where they get turned into a donkey. So it's a kind of version of Ovid's Metamorphoses that's going on here. But there are also other characters that he's drawing off from myth. So Theseus comes with a reputation into the play. So he's the duke that starts the play. And in early modern culture, in the 16th century culture, he would have had twin reputations, which are kind of there right from the start. One is as a kind of just and kind of good ruler, and the other is as an appalling womanizer. And so those twin reputations arrive with Theseus in those opening lines of the play, where he's kind of wanting to hurry up and get married to his wife, and she's kind of holding him back, saying, no, it's fine. So there's also kind of bits of myth kind of falling into the play as well. Where it sits in Shakespeare's career, I think, is quite interesting. So it's he's writing this in 1595. It's about 5 years into his career. He's already pretty well known for writing history plays. He's written 2 or 3 comedies, but the kind of big plays, I guess, like Hamlet, Julius Caesar, they're 5 years away. So it's kind of somewhere between those 2 bits of his career. But something quite interesting has happened to him in the recent years, which is that in 1592, 1593, a couple of years before, all the theatres had closed down from plague. About 15.
Imagine that.
I know.
What could that feel like? I don't even.
And they. About 15,000 people died in London. So it's about 10% of. But Shakespeare turned his hand to other things, as many of us did during recent years as well. And what he did was write long-form poetry. And he wrote a famous poem of his, Venus and Adonis, and it's the thing that he was most well known for throughout his career. We know him best, I guess, for his plays, but his contemporaries knew him best as, he's the guy who wrote Venus and Adonis. It got through multiple different editions. My favorite example for like how people received his reputation is that there's some really awful amateur plays written for Cambridge students called the Parnassus plays, about 3 years after Midsummer. 1598-ish, and in one of the plays there's this character called Gullio who's very stupid, but also he's a Cambridge student who's obsessed with writing love poetry, and his friends take the mickey and talk to him about his love for Shakespeare, and he says that I will worship sweet Master Shakespeare, and I'll put his Venus and Adonis under my pillow. So Shakespeare's building this reputation as a love poet, a poet who's particularly good at depicting love and desire and the effects of love and desire, and that's a shift from his early career where he's establishing his real role as writing history plays. And that carries on throughout his career. People at one point call him the English Ovid. So Francis Mears calls him the English Ovid, sweet-tongued and mellifluous Shakespeare. He's honey-tongued, rather, and mellifluous Shakespeare. And it's in Midsummer Night's Dream that he seems to be moving that interest in love poetry onto the stage, and all of that rich language of love poetry, all of the kind of crazy obsessions of Renaissance love poetry like Petrarchan poetry and so on, are kind of being lived out by these characters on stage in multiple ways. So the 4 young lovers, obviously, but also the insane kind of love story between Bottom and Titania as the kind of central emblem of this play, really, that image of a fairy in love with a man who's got a donkey's head on him. So it's all of those influences from Ovid, his development of kind of a language of love poetry. Then when the theatres open again, he writes Romeo and Juliet, and then Midsummer Night's Dream in reasonably quick succession. And it's like putting all of that on the stage. Like, how do we make a show out of all of that?
I mean, that's fascinating. And, when you talk about metamorphosis, there is a theatrical alchemy as well of transforming what's script and words on a page into something that is realized on stage and becomes real. And Virginia, you've played Puck, you've played Helena, you've played Titania. What's been memorable for you about taking those parts and transforming them and putting them up on stage?
Yeah, great. Okay, so Helena for me is one of those ones that I remember when I first encountered her, which was young. I saw a lot of productions of Midsummer Night's Dream young. I was like, oh, that's me. That's me. She's tall and she's a bit weird and she's funny and she goes after what she wants. And I was like, shit, a brick. This is from 400 years ago and that's me. So that was a really nice feeling. And I was telling these guys that my very first time playing Helena was at the age of 8 when I forced somebody else in my class to read the Helena Hermia earliest scene into me doing How Happy Some or Other Some Can Be. And I just, like, what drove that? No, megalomaniac desire to be a Shakespearean actor, I suppose, really. So the thing that I love about Helena and the thing that I love about those lovers is that they are truly funny. They're funny. Helena particularly, but they're funny. And the scrapes they get into are funny. And Hermia finds her own funniness too, which I love. And a great Hermia is a wonderful thing. I also remember as a kid, and then of course I went on and did Helena 1,000 times in auditions for the rest of my life. I remember the line very particularly when this hail some heat from Hermia felt. That sense where I was like, even as a kid, I was like, yeah, that's what it feels like. Feels bitter and weird, and then you're actually like, and that's the actual breath, and that actually melted him, and then what am I doing? I love Titania. I mean, I'm going to leave you to speak to Titania. I reckon it's probably pretty fair. But what was exciting about playing Puck for Midsummer Night's Dream was, firstly, I never thought I'd get a Puck. I never thought anybody would look at me and think, mischievous fairy. Yeah. I thought they would look at me and think, oh, yeah, Amazon queen. Yeah, sure, cool. Yeah, absolutely, Hippolyta, and then get rid of her. But what I loved about it was the sense of, and you didn't mention this, but I'm just wondering about the timescale suddenly, because I was like, for me, Puck is very much servant of two masters. Like, Puck is doing that commedia dell'arte, like, I've got two people who are riding my back and I have to fix all these things and I can't, and I keep getting things wrong, and that only makes things worse, but also more interesting for me. Like, I love that sense that there's such dynamic scenes and things get worse and worse and worse because of that. And I think what was delightful about playing Puck in that structure is that it was also, I was playing Simone Young. So we dressed me to look like Simone Young, and I was the conductor. I was the person who was trying to conduct things and keep things under control, bring people on, there've been lots of Pucks through the world who are stage managers, and, it is a very malleable creature to make your metaphor work beautifully.
And can fly around the world in 40 minutes.
My favourite line is always, I go, look how I go. I'm just obsessed with that line.
Come on, I'm doing it, all right? I'm doing it. Now, Imogen, you played Titania, and Titania's coming up again for you. What's it like playing a supernatural being? I mean, how do you even start to conceive of embodying a queen of the fairies, someone with power like that?
It was funny because I also was playing Peter Quince, who is P-E-T-A in my version, Peter Quince. So I had to go very quickly from Peter Quince to Titania, which was such a different energy from like theatre director to and obviously everyone has different ideas of what Titania is, and I guess when you're rehearsing, you have to kind of throw all those away. But how did I? Because it was in the moment. I had to kind of just drop all that frantic Peter Quince energy and tune into this other kind of supernatural state. We had this structure which we'll be using again. It was kind of like a wall of a barn. Maybe you've even seen the show, although it didn't get to Sydney. But so we were climbing around this structure, and it was very shadowy, kind of creature-esque movement. So I think a lot of it came from the movement. But yeah, and I had this kind of little hollow in the middle of the wall that I kind of lingered in, and yeah, I think I just imagined that I was a spider and I hung out there waiting for my prey.
Because she's got real authority, Titania. That's the thing. She's got authority. She's got power,
Yes.
and her own husband is trying to strip her of it, like humiliate it out of her.
Yes.
Like it's problematic stuff.
It really is, and we should talk about the dark side of this play as well, because there is a dark side, and let's start there, because Oberon puts the juice on Titania's eyes, and that takes agency away from her. Then whoever she sees when she first wakes up, she has to fall in love with, and then when the scales fall from her eyes at the end, when she gets the antidote, she's horrified at what's happened. And then everything is like, oh well, let's rock the ground where these lovers are sleeping, and let's have some fun. How do you reconcile that?
It's very tricky. I still don't know I played it a particular way, but I find it very tricky as a woman playing that role in terms of losing agency, and then kind of non-consensually as well. So that is quite dark. That speaks to the darkness of being kind of love drugged. And I have seen productions that go really into that. But I think I wanted to be in the desire and in the love and in that kind of amazing euphoric energy that she goes into, but I also wanted to find some agency within that. So I imagined it like a kind of invitation, because she's holding all this, in her power and in her responsibility as the fairy queen of the fairy realm and all the realms. She's holding so much weight and I think pain for where the imbalance of the world and the imbalance of her love with Oberon, and I think that's just not working for her at all. And so even though Oberon love drugs her, in a way it's kind of what she really needs in my interpretation, and she kind of goes on this amazing journey and totally falls in love with the most beautiful donkey you've ever seen.
That's right. And it's also, Virginia, it's also dark the way that the Hermia and Helena's relationship is already starting to crack at the start of the play. Shakespeare loves doing this. He loves showing us relationships that are already starting to fray. We don't really see the good times at school where they were like two cherries on one stem and so on. We see what heat this Hermia felt. Like we already see her resentment towards her friend. How does that manifest, and how does it get reconciled at the end of the play?
I think that's I think Shakespeare, were he living now, would be a phenomenal writer of very good series television. And this is why, because he gets you in right at the good point. Yeah. He does it, and often, of course, we do trims too, and you lose the first scene or something too, but like this sense of like, here we go, here's the instigating action, off we go. There's no fat, which is great. Admitting that everything went through folios and everybody was just trying to remember what they said in their production, which was, 10 years ago. But yeah, I love that sense that things drive immediately. Things you go straight into action, and things get more and more complicated. But I always love thinking about just have one sentence, Ginny. There we go. Okay, in our production for the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, we swapped Oberon and Titania at the point of where one of those fairies says to Puck, "Go fetch me that flower." Ordinarily, it is, of course, Oberon, and we swapped it, and it's Titania, and that was very thrilling. That was very exciting. It has occasionally been done before. It wasn't entirely our idea, but it was good. It was so exciting, and it was great to see our beautiful Titania sort of. You got to really see somebody deal with the horror of their actions too, which sometimes you miss in an Oberon. Sometimes, true, But the thing that I always think about darkness in Midsummer Night's Dream is the fact that and maybe this is also what you're saying too, that we bring it in right at a crisis point. That first big speech from Titania is, listen to me, the world is upside down. Everything's backed up. The water doesn't run the way it should. We have fucked up.
It's a climate crisis.
It's climate crisis. It really is. It's this sense of like, well, if the people governing the earth, if the people at the top of the hierarchy aren't in alignment, aren't looking towards the same thing, then the rest, everybody else underneath goes into chaos, and the earth goes into chaos too. And I mean, I know you know how, like, when that speech starts, you're like, oh God, it can feel geographical, can't it? And the nine men's Morris, and the thing over here, and the thing, and the... but it's got such drive of like, the planet is on fire unless you sort out your pride, Oberon. That's quite thrilling. It's very humanizing of the climate crisis, let's say, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that sort of chaos runs through the play and is driven a lot by Puck and by Oberon. And then with the Mechanicals and their wonderful kind of version of Pyramus and Thisbe, which, Hugh, brings me to the thought that Romeo and Juliet and Midsummer Night's Dream were written at exactly the same time. So can you tell us a little bit about the connection? Some people even call that a diptych, like two pieces of art sitting next to each other as one work. Can you tell us about the connection between those two plays?
Yeah, so they're written really close to each other, and we used not, I think, to know which order they were, but we now think it was Romeo and Juliet first, and then a kind of fantastic comic rewrite in Midsummer Night's Dream. Because if you think about the story of Pyramus and Thisbe that the Mechanicals are staging, it's the exact same story as Romeo and Juliet, of kind of mistimed suicides, misunderstood assignations, timing going wrong, and then kind of tragedy ensuing. And this story of Pyramus and Thisbe, Shakespeare gets straight out of Ovid, lands it into Midsummer Night's Dream, but rewrites it in Romeo and Juliet in a kind of more modern kind of situation. There's also little other kind of connections between them as well. So there's a Queen Mab speech in Romeo and Juliet, if anybody knows that speech, about the kind of madness of love, madness of lovers' dreams, and that's realized in a kind of fairyland as well. There's also kind of the use of potions in both to make kind of generic switches. So, you know, if the potions had gone well in Romeo and Juliet, it would have been a comedy if they'd managed to kind of get them the right way around. But in Midsummer Night's Dream, they eventually do. They get a chance to rewrite and actually get them the right way around. So it is like a kind of comic rewriting, but obviously the thing about Midsummer Night's Dream is that the Mechanicals completely misunderstand what it might mean to stage a tragedy in the middle of a wedding. It's not the most appropriate play for a wedding. It's probably just about the least appropriate play you could choose for a wedding, about mistimed love and double suicide. The story Pyramus and Thisbe is also a story that was important in Shakespeare's culture. People retold it quite often, but they often told it with a kind of moral to it. So in the English translation that Shakespeare would have been familiar with, it's introduced as a kind of, this is what happens when you fall headlong into love. It's too fast, too quick, and you all die of pain. That's what the story's about. But then if you read the Ovid, it's actually a story about why the mulberry bush turns black, because as the lovers die at the end, their blood stains the white mulberry black. And Thisbe's last wish is that lasts as a kind of memorial to their true love. And that's why mulberries are always black. And that's often in Ovid, that it's a story not about morals really, but about why something is how it is. And it's really just a depiction of love. So that idea of the emblem of love being a stained mulberry. That arrives kind of interestingly, I think, in Midsummer Night's Dream with a description of how the love in idleness potion is born, when Oberon says that he sees Cupid fire his arrow at a flower that turns purple and then is now a kind of love potion. So it kind of lands in that way as well, Pyramus and Thisbe. And I think it's kind of interesting, Shakespeare's thinking, I think, in Midsummer Night's Dream about how these stories play out in culture. So what does it mean for an audience to watch a play about tragic love? Having just written one in Romeo and Juliet, he then writes a play about what it might mean to think about how love and desire turns itself into art. And so I think Midsummer Night's Dream, for me, it's my favourite Shakespeare play. I love admitting that. Very favourite Shakespeare play, ever since I was young. And I think it's, for me now, it's because it's where his most careful, even though he's very young, he's only 31 when he's writing this, it's his most careful thinking about art, or his most thorough thinking about art, this play.
I think it just shows such a generosity of spirit too, that Shakespeare is like wrote a hit in Romeo and Juliet and then was like, but also, I can send myself up, guys. I can absolutely send it up. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's so charming that he goes back to back and is like, my earlier work. Well, this is the comedy version of it.
Yeah, and what's that line that Theseus, he talks about art, the making of art. The artist takes shapes. No, what's that line? He takes ideas out of the world and then turns them into shapes.
And he links the madman, the lover, and the poet as people who are able to make shapes out of nothing.
Shapes out of nothing. Yeah.
And all the way through the play, that's what people are thinking about. When Bottom wakes up from this kind of crazy experience, he says, "I've got no words to explain what just happened to me." And then he does all that kind of confusion, eyes haven't heard and so on. But then at the end of that fantastic little speech he has when he's woken up and I haven't got ears anymore, what happened to me, I don't know. He says, "I know what we'll do. We'll turn this into a poem and we'll recite it at the end of the play."
Yeah.
It's also not entirely appropriate and it doesn't happen, sadly. But it is that all the way through Shakespeare's thinking about how is this kind of crazy experience of love, desire, tragic, like awful, kind of really terrifying events. How can we turn that into something beautiful? Is I think often what's happening in Midsummer Night's Dream, which is why I now I think when I was a kid I just liked it because it had fairies and stuff in it. But now I like it, I think, because it is a kind of joyous thinking about how art can rescue us and do something beautiful.
I love that. I also love tracking Shakespeare's use of imagery through plays, and the way that his mind, I like thinking about how his mind might have been thinking. So, for example, in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Lysander describes love, and he says love is it's like the lightning in the collied night, that in a spleen unfolds both heaven and earth, and ere a man hath power to say, behold, the jaws of darkness do devour it up. So he's saying that love is like lightning, and as soon as it flashes, before you can even say, look, there's lightning, it's gone. And then in Romeo and Juliet, Juliet's describing her and Romeo's love, and she's saying it's too rash, too rude, too unadvised, too sudden, and it's too like the lightning, which doth cease to be ere one can say it lightens. So the exact same image is extraordinary that he's thinking and then kind of just reshaping it, and that's going through his mind at the same time. I love tracking those through Shakespeare's plays. When you were, Imogen, when you were playing Peter Quince, there's a fantastic scene where they get to rehearse a play, and we really get an insight into perhaps I think Shakespeare loved to vent about actors in his plays. I think and we get a fantastic insight into what it was perhaps like to rehearse. What did you learn?
Just one actor that wants to take up all the space.
Yeah.
No, it was very accurate. Well, actually, that's unkind. I think we've maybe evolved slightly in rehearsal rooms, but yeah, there's still sometimes a bit of somebody who wants to make it all about themselves. Yes, I can't. What else?
But also just thinking about the way that Shakespeare's actors would have rehearsed, so they would have only got their lines, and that's what happens, isn't it?
Yes.
Peter Quince just gives out parts.
That's right. I give out the parts. No one knows what they're doing. They don't know the whole play. They've just got their little bit, and
then Bottom does all of his all at once, cues and all.
Once. Yeah, and we were talking before about that way of rehearsing of you may know this, but that Shakespeare only gave the part for the actor to the actor. So
Plus a couple of words as a cue, right?
Cue
right.
lines,
So
yeah.
so as we were saying before, you'd just be waiting and ready to go. Where's my line? And on.
Makes you really listen, really, really
So
listen.
you've done an exercise around that.
I have indeed. We did a production of Midsummer Night's Dream where Greta Skarkey played Titania.
As a name
Casual.
drop right
Yeah,
there,
sorry about
nice.
that. Oh my God, guys. And we put it on 3 nights with differing casts, and you were only allowed to learn your bits and your 3 cue lines. And so it really meant you listened like the devil, and not just, we were saying this before, not just waiting for your bit, but like going, what about this is important to me? What about this is going to lead to, like, oh my God, yes, good point. And you'd hear the cue and off you'd go. But I agree. I think there is something so, so wonderful. And I reckon there's a reason that it's lots of people's favourite Shakespeare play, and especially actors or people starting, is because of the way that it loves actors, and it loves them with such a forgiving heart, because it makes so much fun of them, and it makes fun of the process, this ridiculous thing that we do, and it points out how ridiculous it is. And then if it works well, oh God, if you get a flute who breaks your heart, if you get a flute who, when lying with Pyramus dead in her arms, actually goes like, okay, this is it. And you're like, oh my God.
I've seen that, yeah.
I know, right?
yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. When that happens, that's a gorgeous thing. It's not necessary. You can keep going joke, joke, joke. Of course you can. But that's lovely. And I just think that's it. I mean, that we're talking about what Shakespeare gave to actors. Like, Shakespeare is also giving just these gifts to actors. So like possibilities like that is a real treat. And the role of bottom, you just give that to a great comedian. You just give that to someone who can find that bombast in themselves, that sense of self-worth. And I long to play bottom. That is truly one of my, I long for it. I just think, and there's such a, you can see, as with lots of his comic roles, you can see he's written, or whatever people can remember of what they did, some really good jokes, and then you can see the bits where it sort of like drifts away, and you go, oh, well, that's probably the bit where you just fill. You'd stand at the front and you'd just do some of your material for a while. You know what I mean? Like, it's that, those stratas of performers, of court, of lovers, and then these rude mechanicals down the bottom where you're like, well, yeah, just do your bit, or do your bit with the dog, the dog that's in...
Two Gentlemen of Right.
Thank you very much. There you go. Get the, oh God, we've got a dog this year. Great, fantastic. We'll do the dog bit for a bit. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they would have had fun with it, and I love the idea that Shakespeare is fascinated by these clowns, but also frustrated by the actors. And you see that coming up in Hamlet when he complains about, let not those who play your clowns speak more than is set down for them. Right?
But I think
Do the bit with the dog.
But I think it's also it's a gift for actors. It's also a gift for an audience as well, because I think this is why Midsummer Night's Dream is still funny, or very obviously funny in the way that some Shakespeare comedies, you have to work hard to make them funny, which I'm sure you know better than me. It's because we're sharing in that experience. The one thing we have in common as an audience in a Shakespeare play is that we're an audience. And the whole point of the performance within the performance is that the actors mistake how audiences respond to plays. The assumption that if they see somebody in a lion's costume, they're going to think it's really a lion, and they just misunderstand that when audiences see that, they kind of know it's not a lion. So it's and that kind of, it's a kind of shared experience of the comedy, and that's, I think, what motors, like, why it's still funny now. It doesn't rely on complex wordplay like Much Ado About Nothing, where you have to really try quite hard to sell some of that language to an audience. The situation is obvious why it's funny, because you're in it already. You're there,
And you're just taking it really, really seriously.
That's the key.
Yeah,
That's the
and
key to comedy.
The beauty of, that's the comedy, and that's the beauty of watching these people take it so, so seriously. And it's just that beautiful fine line of, like, absolutely tragic as well, and just hilarious that they really care. And I agree, it can be so beautiful when you're watching the Pyramus and Thisbe, and they really, really care, and it's all wrong, but then there are moments of just absolute, oh, you're just really in it, and you're holding it, and you believe in theatre.
That's right. There's a great line in Ben Elton's. Has anyone seen Upstart Crow, that Ben Elton show about Shakespeare? In the first episode, his wife says to him, "Look, Will, comedy's not your strong point. Can you please stick to tragedy?" And Shakespeare says, "No, comedy is my strong point. If you just requires lengthy explanations and copious footnotes. If you do your research, you'll find that I'm actually very funny." And I think sometimes that's a problem we have as actors or producers of Shakespeare, is that some of it's just not really funny to us anymore, and that's nobody's fault. It's just that some of those references have moved on. Yeah.
Comedy's culturally specific in ways that tragedy isn't. I mean, tragedy is very easy to see why somebody dying is tragic, but comedy is really specific.
But on that, I think A Midsummer Night's Dream is pretty amazing comically in that it's situational. So it's, the lovers are just with the wrong people, and this person's in love with this person, and as long as you kind of play that and have fun with it, it is hilarious. And kind of Shakespeare set it up that they're all in the woods, and then you just have to ride through it because it's inherently funny.
Are you telling me this is his first comedy?
No. So we've had Comedy of Errors, we've had Love's Labour's Lost.
Because I was like,
Two
imagine
Jets.
that being your first album.
Yeah, not bad.
Like, Jesus.
But I would
Christ.
say it's the first good comedy, would I say?
I mean, I agree with that, but I like that he's got an on-ramp.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I just think on that, I think some of the earlier comedies are very like comedy, capital C comedy, and this one is a little bit more, it's like a sophisticated comedy, I would say.
Yeah, and the interweaving of the three storylines is extraordinary. Yeah.
I like to think that he saw an amateur production of his Romeo and Juliet, and then he was like, you know what? Actually, there's gold in this. There's gold.
That's very good. That's good. I like to think that Shakespeare's. Sometimes we think of Shakespeare as this, almighty great genius who just landed and everything's perfect. But I love to see the development of Shakespeare's work over his career. As you say, some of the early comedies, he was learning what's funny, what works, what doesn't. Some of the early tragedies, really, Titus Andronicus is really a young man's, bloody, gory tragedy until he starts delving into more of the philosophy. In terms of the language of this play, what is different, do we think, about the language compared to some of Shakespeare's later plays where the language starts to really shift and change?
I think the thing that characterises the language of Midsummer, I don't know if it makes it a young play, but it's certainly different from the later plays, is that it is like a poem a lot of the time. That it's Shakespeare writes in a very eccentric way. No other playwright from his period writes like Shakespeare. Shakespeare can't have one metaphor without having 10. Nobody writes like that. So all his contemporaries, Johnson, Middleton, Fletcher, they do not write like that. Only Shakespeare writes like that. I don't know why he wrote like that. It's a kind of peculiarity, but it's something that we've grown to love. And I think Midsummer, if it has a flaw, is that he tries to do too much. Like there is a lot going on in this play. And that's what makes it seem youthful to me. It's like he's kind of buzzing with ideas and trying to get as many of them out there onto the stage as possible. So that's what I think makes it young. The language, I think, is drawn off poetry, as is Romeo and Juliet as well. So a lot of the language from Romeo and Juliet is straight out of sonnet writing traditions, distraught lovers, the chaos of love. And some of that finds its way into Midsummer as well. So it is a kind of, the language comes from poetry. What it doesn't have that the later plays have is the kind of complex syntax of the later plays. So it's actually quite easy to hear. As an audience, you can kind of, it's not hard to hear the dialogue in the ways that sometimes you're in Winter's Tale, when did that sentence start and has it finished yet? It's really difficult to know.
Sure.
This is pretty obvious. And has, some fantastic kind of set speeches as well.
Yeah, great set pieces. And, that four-hander between the lovers, right? What a great set. What a fun scene to perform, right? Fun scene to act.
It really is, and it's still funny. You have to work really hard to not make that scene funny. You know, I'm sure we could if we really put our brains to it. But it's a funny scene. It's situationally funny. It's got one-liners. It's all of that stuff. Sheer urged her height. It's just always funny to me.
Thou painted maypole, yeah.
I know, great.
And all of those turning points where she realizes that, oh, maybe it's your fault, or maybe it's you. Oh, it's you who are conspiring. It's fantastic little turning points. There are some things, Imogen, in this play that really vex me, though. Okay, and here's one. The flower, the effect of the flower at the end. Everyone gets the antidote except Demetrius. Demetrius does not get the antidote, and at the end he's still in love with Helena. Now, here's my question to all of you. Is this like, which one of the vaccines? Is it the measles vaccine that you have to top up every 5 years? Does Puck have to keep topping it up? Or is it like that vaccine, is it the mumps vaccine that lasts the rest of your life? What is going on with this drug?
Is it maybe that? So it's what is it? So Demetrius doesn't ever wake up, does he?
No.
Is that right? No, wait.
But he wakes up.
He wakes up, but
He's returned to his former state. That's the way I always think about it too, because he was in love with Helena.
Right.
Helena starts with, and ere he's looked on Hermia's eyes, he rained down oaths that he was only mine. Right. So there is pre-story previously on Midsummer Night's Dream. This is what has happened. So there is justice in it, but yes, I agree. If you needed to argue it, he is still drugged. Yeah, heavily drugged to be in love with someone.
I'm just worried about, is he going to wake up one day and go, oh my God, what's going on?
Wait a minute.
Where am I?
And that's marriage, baby.
yeah, it's like he just had something a bit off in his system for a while, and it just needed to balance back.
So the drug corrected it for him.
Maybe he was already on a drug.
Also, I think we can all agree that Demetrius, primarily Demetrius, but a little bit Lysander too, Demetrius is one of the worst kind of boys who we have all dated. 10,000% we have all dated this man, but we do not need to date him again.
No.
So that sense of like, he's capricious, he goes for the newer, younger model, like he was happy with her until something more exciting turned up. Like this is young love. This is actually what it feels like to be a teenager or in your early 20s, right? You know, we talk all the time about Shakespeare inventing the human, right? And it's usually you go to the tragedies and you go to Hamlet and you go, look at the complexity of these thoughts. But that's what it feels like when you're first in love. You're like, oh, this one, oh, this one. Yeah. And I think, honestly, what we need to do is shake Helena by the lapels and say, listen, spaniel elsewhere. You are better than this.
Get away. Yeah.
It's also he stops doing what he's told as well. There's a more positive way of thinking about it. So early on, he's just doing what Aegeus tells him to do. Yes. And it's kind of that. Yeah. So by the end of the play, that patriarchal control, which is really there at the start, with Aegeus and Theseus threatening to kill Hermia or send her to a nunnery. If she doesn't marry the person and Demetrius is really in line with that at the start. And somehow through the play, you've kind of got to get to a happy ending where you have to forget that Aegeus tried to kill his daughter. Because if you were to remember that at the end, at the same time as you remembered that Demetrius was still under the influence, none of it works. Yeah. So you have to somehow at the end forget. And in the same way that Aegeus somehow just forgets who he wanted his daughter to marry, even though he was prepared to kill her.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking about that moment because I think it's nice that he sees. He's there at the end, isn't he?
Demetrius or Aegeus?
No, Aegeus. Yeah, he sees them, and I love when actors who play Aegeus are very moved by the image that they see in front of him with. Just people in love together and okay and happy. And I love that that's where that transition happens for him, that the acceptance of that image of them all standing there half clothed, probably.
In the right pairing.
In the right pairing.
That's right.
Yeah.
They got it right. But also, Aegeus, there are a couple of lines where he says to the Duke, "No, look, arrest them! Like, look at what he's doing." And it's interesting to me, so go ahead, Virgin.
No, I was just going to say the patriarchy will still patriarchy.
Sure.
Even at the end of a comedy, they're still like, wait a minute. No, stop it.
No doubt, absolutely. But here's the thing with Shakespeare comedies that is interesting to me is that they're about the ways that society cohere, the ways that societies arrange themselves. And in order for a society to arrange itself, someone is left out. Someone is other. So I saw Twelfth Night the other night at the Opera House, Malvolio. Everyone's happy, and we go, oh my God, that's right, Malvolio. And in he comes, I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you. There's always one character or two who are excluded.
And there's exclusions all the way through this play. You were talking earlier about the dark side of the play. For me, that's often the kind of shadow of female community that runs all the way through the play, and the way that that's repeatedly sidelined. So if you think at the start of the play, Theseus is marrying Hippolyta, who he has wooed with his sword, and Hippolyta, of course, is an Amazon. He's worried that his marriage isn't happening quick enough, and he says that the moon is like a dowager, lingering a young man's revenue, like a widow with too much money who won't die soon enough. And then the idea of Titania giving up the changeling. And why does she want to keep the changeling? It's because one of her handmaidens has died giving birth to him. And it's a beautiful image of female friendship in that scene where she describes the pregnant handmaid imitating the boats. And so it's extraordinary. And there's also obviously the image of Helena and Hermia as friends as well. So punctuated throughout the play, there's these images either of female friendship or of very strong single women. So there's also the dowager who will protect Lysander and Hermia when they escape, also a dowager. So a dowager is a widow who has somehow managed to keep hold of her own money, which is a worry for people like Theseus. But this dowager lives outside the law of Athens, and so she's able to help Hermia and Lysander. So all the way through, there's these images of female community that's on the brink of disappearing. And then, so I think you're right. The comedy is thinking about how communities are forged and pulled apart, and often in Shakespeare's comedies, that's, how do we overcome male friendship and the strong bonds of male friends in order to get at least one of them married somehow by the end of the play? I mean, that's what Merchant of Venice is all about, isn't it?
Much ado
it's about
as well.
quite a lot of other things as well, obviously. But one of the things that it's about is about how do we get somebody away from his male friends and married to somebody. In this, I think it is more about how is oddly about the shapes of female friendship, and they kind of shadow the play all the way through. And are sidelined by the end. And I think that's one of the kind of melancholy things about Titania in particular, is the giving up of not just the boy, which she seems to do silently by the end, but that means that she's lost the memory of her friend. And that, I think, is where the darkness of this play, or it's not darkness, but a kind of an odd melancholy at the heart of it.
Yeah, and I certainly felt that in Twelfth Night. There's a melancholy in that, As You Like It. There's a deep melancholy in that play. A lot of Shakespeare's comedies. What are some memorable productions? What's your favourite production or memorable production that you've seen? Do you remember any?
Well, I was just talking about a version at the Globe directed by Emma Rice that was Helena was played by a man called Helenus. You might have seen it online, but I found that really interesting that it was about Helenus. Yeah, because as we were talking about, Demetrius loves Helena. If that is to be true, that we assume that Demetrius already loves Helena, and that's why at the end he comes back to her. I really loved that version that was about Helenus was gay and was just not ready to admit that to himself.
Demetrius, you mean? Yeah.
Sorry, yes, that is right. Helenus was very openly gay, and Demetrius was not ready to admit that to himself. Mm-hmm. I found that really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hugh, you've got a favourite production?
I do. I also love that production. It also has a kind of, the music is borrowed from India, and it borrows some of the imagery from the play around the kind of Indian atmosphere around Titania really wonderfully, I think. I'm going to cheat and say my favourite production is a film version, and I'm allowed to, I usually hate Shakespeare on film with a passion. I don't see the point, but there's a 1935 film, which if you haven't seen, I would encourage everybody to see. It's directed by Max Reinhardt. It was filmed in 1935. It was immediately banned in Nazi Germany because they used Mendelssohn's music. He was a Jewish composer. Max Reinhardt was an Austrian Jew who 2 years later escaped and went on to work in Hollywood. And he brings with him all of the big production of kind of the inheritance of 19th, early 20th century European theatre. So it's a cast of gazillions. The whole show is huge, this film. Mendelssohn's music, it's also beautiful. There's some miscasting in it, has got to be said. So Mickey Rooney is Puck, and James Cagney is Bottom. It's quite odd, but
Listen to that sentence again. James Cagney as Bottom.
but it is funny, whether intentional or not. It's hard to discern. But the main thing about it is that it realizes some of the beauty of the play in film with all of the kind of Hollywood silver screenness of that. And my favorite bit is the beginning. So it has like fairies dancing, like a kind of, Hollywood thing, like very like artificial and kind of crazy, going through the forest in beautiful formation. It has little animals hopping through, so it brings alive the animal nature of the forest. So there's like little frogs and toads hopping through. And my favorite thing, because it absolutely captures the spirit of Midsummer Night's Dream, is that it has a unicorn walk across screen, but it's clearly not a unicorn. It is absolutely clear that this is a donkey with a thing stuck on its head. There's no way around it. And it absolutely magically gets to the heart of this play, which is all about, we've got some stuff. How do we make it look like art? We've got a donkey, let's stick a thing on his head. So it's this mixture of incredibly beautiful and professional, like Hollywood realization of 19th, 20th century theatre tradition, extraordinary, but with these kind of clunky moments, which include Jimmy Cagney as Bottom.
Virginia, how about you?
I don't remember, because Victor Jory as Oberon steals absolutely every scene he's in, because he has this extraordinary crown that kind of glitters. He's like a kind of walking mirror ball as he walks across the screen. So honestly, I can't quite remember who plays Titania. Sorry, Olivia de Havilland is in it. She's the big thing. She's Hermia.
Yeah.
Classic Hermia. Carol Lombard.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
One of the truly great comic actresses.
Yep.
Truly. I know. And was, oh God, she's incredible. That's wonderful.
Any memorable products? I mean, you've been steeped in Shakespeare from a very young age.
Yes, my mother is a Shakespeare scholar who has lectured both of these people.
Yeah.
So yes, I watched a lot. Listen, I mean, if you want to talk about what you can do with this story and how it evolves, I reckon it's worthwhile talking about Laura Murphy's production of The Lovers at Bell Shakespeare. Like the fact that she went, okay, let's take these central four and let's take two of these power figures too, and let's look in at them and let's use them like her own deeply intelligent, metaphorical, funny storytelling through song to tell this story again. And then her resolution at the end is exactly what we were just saying about Helena, which is you actually can't love anybody else until you love yourself. And you have to do that work yourself, and you have to have your own self-worth. And then you can fall in love with people. Then you can go out and spread joy in the world. But until then, everything's going to be twisted.
You?
Go on, James.
Look, I've seen many amazing productions of Midsummer Night's Dream, but I just want to mention one that I saw in London that really disturbed me. There was one at in Regent's Park. They have that outdoor theatre. I saw a production that really. There's often a trend of really leaning into the darkness in Shakespeare. And so I saw a production that really wanted to make sure that you knew that this was a dark and bad play. And so the mechanicals were enslaved by Theseus. They were kind of locked up in a cage. And he would kind of let them out to be the court entertainment and then lock them up again when it was over. It was so awful, so dark. And poor old Hippolyta was kind of led on in chains, and you know the first word of the play. Who knows what the first word of this play is? It's shared with Richard III. Now, fair Hippolyta, our nuptial hour draws on apace. Now is the winter of our discontent. So they really leaned into Theseus as the tyrant, and set the tone like that. And from then on, everything was like, well, I don't know if I can laugh at this play
Don't
anymore.
feel safe laughing at slavery? Interesting.
Yeah, not
It's
sure.
hard that wooed by a sword, Theseus wooing her by a sword. Because how do you? I saw one version at the Globe as well where Hippolyta they were in combat together pre the play starting, and so we saw her being strong and a warrior, and it was kind of a bit sexy. And then I think she put down her sword, and so did he, and so it was kind of I wooed thee by my sword.
Okay, cool. It was a mutual kind of thing. Yeah, nice.
Which is, I guess, the double entendre with sword, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. On that note,
Maybe.
Imogen Sage, Virginia Gay, Hugh Griffiths, please thank our wonderful panel, and that was a fantastic conversation. Now, friends, we do have time for some questions from the audience if you would care to. We've got a microphone floating around because remember we've got our friends online who'd love to hear you. So just wait to get the microphone and ask away.
James, a question for you
Sure.
about the London production you saw. Wondering when it was and whether it was a deliberate way of putting a mirror onto society and politics in England.
Oh, yeah, look, I'm sure it was, definitely. And there's always darkness in our society. It was at 2012, it was around the time of the Olympic Arts Festival in London. Remember, they had the Olympics and they had an arts festival and a Shakespeare festival. So it was around that time. But yeah, absolutely, Diana. I think that's probably the case for sure. Yeah. Was there a question up the back? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Is that going? I want to briefly go to the Max Reinhardt version because we disagree about a few things. I didn't mind Cagney's Bottom and I didn't mind Rooney's Puck. But the thing that I really want to ask is with the Victor Jory character and the way Oberon is played by him and the whole concept of is Oberon like a type of jealous evil who doesn't really have the power that he should as a king. He has to get Puck to do most of his agency. And when he actually has agency, it's a pretty poor thing, a sleeping draft. And, it's just not what I would consider fantastic agency. So Jory plays it that way. Would you agree?
Yeah, he's an odd presence on screen. I think he does dominate the screen just because of how he looks and the way it's filmed. So it's filmed in these kind of multiple layers, isn't it? And he looks like he's almost not there sometimes, and his costume blends into the scenery. And he does play it in this kind of peculiarly static way. And it is almost as if it's like a silent actor wandered onto a sound stage. There's like not a lot going on, but I kind of like it for that. I think I like the kind of campiness of his performance. Perhaps he's very overly made up, and he looks very arch at times. So there's a lot of eyebrow work going on. But yeah, I mean, I guess in the play itself, I'd agree with you about Oberon. He's quite an odd character, given the power that we've heard that resides in Titania, and her. That the interest that the play has in Titania is obvious. What interest we might have in Oberon is less obvious, I agree. Like, why would we care? Why does he want the child? That's quite peculiar. But actually, while you're talking about Oberon, I'm just going to say he has my favourite lines in the play, though. I know a bank where the wild thyme blows. And it's an appalling scene in a way, because he's setting it up for Robin Goodfellow to find Titania and trick her. But I like it because none of the flowers that he lists, eglantine, woodbine, oxgloves, another one,
Nodding
musk
violets.
rose, nodding violets. None of them would you find in either Ovid or Athens, but you would find if you wandered down the hedgerows of summer in London and England. And it's an extraordinary gift, I think, to his audience, because what he's doing is giving them their world back as a poem. So these are very common flowers in English hedgerows. They're not common anywhere else, and it's like handing their world back to them as a poem. So he has my favourite lines, even though I agree he's quite a kind of strange fish.
Any other questions from the audience? Thoughts? Yes, please.
I'd like to also endorse the notion that this is an accessible play and accessible to the young, because many years ago I was token adult in an amateur production directed by a pair of 18-year-old girls who just finished year 12. We had a wow of a time, and I learned how to do things like sudden changes. I was a Gia, I was Wall, I was God knows how many other people. It was just, and it worked. It worked like a charm. So very accessible play.
Absolutely, absolutely. Other thoughts or questions, friends, in the middle there?
Hello. I'd love to hear the panel's opinion on the difference between prose and verse, and also how that affects the performance of, an actor doing that.
Prose and verse. Well, there's not much prose in this. Well, no, there is from the Mechanicals, of course, but from Titania and the Fairies. No?
Well, yeah. So, well, as an actor, it's the heartbeat. So I feel that the verse really gives it this heartbeat that, and it kind of lifts it into. It really needs to be said and it really needs to be heard, and there's a commitment to it. Prose feels, I guess it's also a bit of a class thing in this show, maybe, is it? Where, where I just feel like the Mechanicals are using prose, the everyday people, and they have a different kind of way of, speaking and interacting, and the queens and the kings and the lovers and the aristocrats have a kind of formality. But what's really exciting with Shakespeare is the moments that they kind of blend, or the moments that, as you may know, that the pentameter kind of drops away, and the emotion kind of takes over, and you kind of, I think when you're working with the text, you have to kind of just go with that and let the beat kind of fall away, and let yourself fall into those moments of the characters kind of trying to work out where they are as well.
I also think in this one particularly, the fairies have a different language too. They have a different rhythm. They're in 4/4 rather than iambic pentameter. Mm-hmm. Not exclusively, but the little fairies are Puck and the generic fairy number 1 who Puck first terrorizes. Hannah Fairy, whither wander you? Over hill, over dale, thorough rush, thorough briar. Over hill, over thorough fire, we do wander everywhere, swifter than the moon sphere. So it's just like always just going, hey, where are you? Oh, what do the people sound like? Who are these people? Especially, I don't know if doubling was a thing in the past, but obviously doubling is a huge thing now, because who can afford 16 people? Nobody. So that sense of like, as soon as you hear these people, even if you're seeing the same faces, you go, oh, fairies. There we go.
Hugh, you've got a theory. Yeah, you've got a theory about that when prose and verse switches.
It might be class a little bit in here. I don't think that's universally true in Shakespeare's plays. It's not, but I think it might be here. But for me, I always think it's so those different shifts in register, different verse, is often like a kind of, I imagine it like a soundtrack. So it's when you're watching a movie and the sound changes and you know that you're in a different atmosphere. It's the change of rhythm allows the audience to hear a different atmosphere. So, when you're in a horror movie and suddenly you get a load of minor chords, you're like, oh, okay, bad things. It's something. But I've got to say that the bit of prose that I love in this play is Bottom waking up. And I often use it with my students as an example of how orderly and formal Shakespeare's prose is, because it's all repetition. The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, methought I was, methought I had, and so on. Although I always want him to play that as if he's still a donkey. So he goes, methought, because it's the sound of a donkey. But it's nevertheless, it is very orderly, despite the silliness of that.
You were also talking to me once about that prose might be a time when they're trying to nut out an argument or something.
Yeah, so that's also what's happening to Bottom, isn't it? He's like, me thought I had, the eye of man. It's like a kind of logical exercise. Like, how can I make sense of what I just did or what was done to me? And often in Shakespeare's plays, you'll see when there's a moment where something needs to be argued out, we'll switch to prose. It happens in Hamlet, for sure. So, yeah.
I had nothing more.
Okay. I was the last thing I was going to say on that is often I remind actors that that verse is heightened language. It's not naturalistic. People didn't wander around speaking in perfect iambic pentameter in Elizabethan time. That's not the way. So it is deliberately poetry. It's meant to be heightened. And so the actor needs to reach for the size of the ideas and the images in verse rather than try and boil them down to a naturalistic world within themselves. Yeah, over here.
Just a follow-up to that language thing. Did anyone see the pop-up globes Midsummers when they were out a few years ago?
Oh, I didn't see that one. Did you?
The
think I did,
All the
yes.
fairies delivered their lines in Maori. And it worked. It worked. I was just stunned, but it worked all the way through. And given the change of register that you've been talking about, I would be interested in any thoughts in response to that.
Yeah, I've seen a number of multilingual productions of Shakespeare. They are fantastic. They work so well because you're going along on the story and the emotion is carrying you in the story and the relationships between the actors, and they switch key into another language and then switch back again. I saw this Zimbabwean pair do a version of Hamlet, just two guys. I think they're called the Two Gents Productions. They came out to Australia, and it was absolutely riveting, even though half of the story was in a language I didn't understand, but I understood what was going on between two human beings. And Shakespeare has obviously been translated into so many languages all around the world, and each one of them has their own flavour and character, and they love it.
I think it's really smart too when you're talking about the fairies particularly, and that the fairies are the ones who are speaking in language. Is that you say this is the earth, this is the sound of the earth, this is the sound of the native inhabitants of this earth, the native owners, the native custodians, the first custodians of this earth. So let's allow them to use their language. That's a beautiful thing.
And when the world is out of whack and not listening to those
To the first custodians of the land.
everything
Imagine.
gets messed up. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got time for just one more question, if there is one. Any last thoughts? Right here in the middle, last question.
Thanks. Thank all of you. Just taking up that last point, a very long time ago, and you're probably all too young to have seen it, at the Sydney Olympic Arts Festival, there was a production of The Dream at the Wharf, and all the fairies were Indigenous Australian fairies. And in fact, the play started with the Rainbow Serpent flying down from the ceiling and splitting into Tanya and Oberon. It was immensely moving and relevant, I think. From memory, some of it was spoken, some of their lines were spoken in various Indigenous languages, but basically it was done in English. But it was very, very affecting, the way that worked.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank our panel here tonight. It's been a fascinating conversation for me, Imogen, Virginia, and Hugh. Thank you so much. And thank you to the State Library as well. Thank you.